everyone. Welcome to the 2022-2023 Stratfor Public Schools Budget Workshop presentation. We have a quorum, and I would invite Dr. Sunday to begin.
All right. Am I audible? Yes?
Yes.
All right. Good icebreaker. Good evening to the board, good evening to committee members, and good evening to my colleagues who are here today. I'd like to also extend a good evening to our viewers at home. If you ask Pam and Jeannie, the budget construction process is year-round. It's year-round. And I am honored to be able to stand in front of the Board of Education and present a budget that we feel is a responsible budget, and is responsive to the needs that we have for overall district and school improvement, but also at the same time taking into consideration the task burden on our community. So what I do have here today is a presentation. It's about 25 slides. What I'm going to do is give a macro view, an overview. For those of you who've had a chance to review the booklets, a lot of what you see today is really just a synthesis of what you have in your booklets. We will reserve some of those micro level questions for the workshops where we can break things out a little bit by department. But I do plan on going straight through, these 25 slides, so please take notes when you can. I do anticipate a rich discussion at the end, so I'm estimating we're going to have roughly an hour of conversation as the full committee on this budget proposal. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of what to expect. I'm going to start with the budget construction process, really the steps that we went through. As I said, according to Pam, this is a full year process. We're going to highlight some of the board goals, as they exist right now. I want to talk a little about some of the things that informed our construction process. And then I'm going to introduce what our proposal will be. Against that, I'll talk a little bit about the context, some of the major drivers of this proposal, some of the challenges that I think it would be prudent for the board to have at the back of their thoughts, or maybe at the front of their thoughts. And then I will close with what I believe from the superintendent perspective is some of our work moving forward. I do want to just really share and be distinct about this, that at this point in time, this is a proposal for the full board to consider. Next slide, please. So I want to start, what I do like about this process is that it's a very collaborative process, and with all of our board members, as you remember, I had the opportunity to sit down with each of you and get a good sense of what's important to you as it relates to our schools. So those conversations, in some way, shape, or form, informed a lot of the work that we've done over the last couple of months. I also would like to recognize our district administrative staff. All of them are here today. It's been a tremendous amount of people who have had deep analysis, deep conversations around some of the processes, resources, and designs that we need to have in place here in Stratford to make sure that our kids have a quality learning experience. It is specifically incredible, because this team has stepped up in a time where I do believe, without a doubt, that it's extremely challenging to be an educational leader, across the country. It's been long days. They've stepped up to the plate, and I'm sure there's going to be many more long days in front of us, but I wanted to take a moment to publicly express my gratitude as I present this budget that we've all worked on today. Next slide. Undeniably, this has been the backbone of my work since I joined the district last year. We have some outstanding principals, and their work in this process, you'll hear me say often about alignment and strategy, And those are some of the organizational things that I've tasked our principals with all year. And each and every one of them have stepped up to the plate. Despite the challenges of operating schools in the pandemic, our principals have worked with their professional communities to make sure that they keep kids as engaged as possible. They reach out and they partner with families to make sure kids are making progress during what has been a very, very challenging time. What you'll find, and you'll hear them speak about it with great clarity, is that this budget, this budget is in large part aligned to their goals. But I'd be kidding if I told you that there were some needs and some requests that they asked for that we have to have different conversations on. So let's move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about this process. Beginning in October, we sent out a calendar to our district to really kind of outline the process and culminating with this day where we present this budget to the board. And then we dove deeply into the work after Thanksgiving. My work has been ongoing with Cabinet, as Pam mentions, or as Pam would say. Budget construction is an ongoing basis because we're always in a constant state of analysis, monitoring our fiscal dispersion, expenditures, and making sure that we can plan for the future. Next on this work is sitting down with principals and reflecting on this current year's school goals, right? And the irony about this is whenever you start to construct a budget for the next year, you do it with existing data at this point in time, right? So we sat with principals, we sat with coordinators, had building level discussions. I know a lot of our principals solicited input from the professional community, from families. So that's been useful in informing what you're going to see here today. But we do feel, without reservation, that this budget is responsible, but it also gives us the opportunity for improvement here in Stratfor Public Schools. What I found interesting, though, is as we progressed through this process is the organic collaboration that ended up happening with our administrators. So informally, without a direction from my office, informally, a lot of our principals end up collaborating, which is good because now it suggests that they have similar goals and similar outcomes for kids is potential realization. Next slide. This is the Stratfor Public Schools mission statement. I'll give you a moment to read it, okay? Because based on the discussions we have here today, this is the commitment we are making to our stakeholders. And when we say all, we mean all. And we talk about high quality learning experiences for every child within our town limits. Let's go to the next slide. As you know, we have 4 priority goals that's embedded in our existing strategic operating plan, and that's family and community partnerships. The one thing I've learned since I've been here, since I arrived last year, is that Stratfor families are engaged. They are willing to partner with us as we deliver educational experiences to their kids. Mastery-based learning, 21st century skills, as well as the social curriculum. Now, over the last couple of years, we understand the impact of the pandemic on our ability to make progress towards some of these goals. It takes a global pandemic, to really reassess your priorities. I do want to segue to the next evolution of this work because this existing strategic plan sunsets this year, okay? That being said, there's a tremendous amount of work in front of the board to work with our community to either refine these priorities, come up with new priorities, or adapt them as we see fit based on the current context, right? Next slide, please. So I have to draw attention to this, okay? I have to draw attention to this. Prior to my arrival at Stratfor Public Schools, this work was undertaken, and it has been a Herculean lift. Tremendous work. And by and large, what this becomes for the Stratfor Public Schools is its North Star, okay? We are hedging our bets and saying that with all the action steps that we put in place, for every child who comes through our system, pre-K through 12, once they graduate, they should walk off our stage with these attributes. So the question now is, why these attributes? Okay, and this is where I want to draw attention to a team of people who've been working tremendously hard. Bob David, who actually happens to be here, has led a lot of this work. Joanna Jarangard, Diane DeCenzo, and a few other people have really led this work. If you really think about this slide right here is the vision for the Stratfor Public Schools. This slide represents the vision of what every child can realize if we have the correct systems, we have the correct educational plan, and we partner with every stakeholder with a vested interest. Our kids, once they leave here with these characteristics, have a better chance to find success as they transition through the world. That being said about the vision, I want to transition to the next slide. Okay? I'm going to talk a little bit for a moment here. When I first arrived last year, one of the most consistent questions families ask me, teachers ask me, and other invested stakeholders is, what is the superintendent's vision for the Stratfor Public Schools? Okay? Simply put, my aim is to make sure that we're one of the most dynamic districts in the region, and that our kids can brag about what their experiences were like when they attended all of our schools, and that they can be adequately prepared to thrive wherever they go. I'm going to take a moment, I'm going to ask you to read that because we're going to unpack that in a few moments. So with this specifically, okay, I'm going to draw attention to the fact that a vision is representative of a future state. Okay, where can we be in X amount of years if we do X, Y, and Z, right? We already know how diverse Stratfor Public Schools is, right? The NIST report has us as the #6 ranked most diverse school in the state of Connecticut. And I think regionally in the New York metropolitan area, we're number 18, based on that media outlet. So let's talk a little bit about this, okay? Because this is my vision, right? The Stratfor Public Schools consist of a diverse student population whose interactions are anchored on integrity and dignity, both in the way they act individually and the way they treat each other. Our students learn in modern facilities and have access to a diverse community of highly effective and skilled educators. Stratfor Public Schools teachers utilize research-based instructional practices to deliver a strong and contemporary curriculum aligned to state, national, and industry standards. We want all of our kids, once they graduate, to either go to college or go into industry, right? The trades. So you'll see that represented in this vision. Through the collaborative partnerships between schools, families, and community, our students outperform their peers at the state, regional, and national levels, and ultimately graduate with attributes of the Stratfor Public Schools profile of a graduate. That's Dr. Osunday's vision. The only problem, though, is I'm clinically trained to write this, right? For a vision to endure, it has to be co-constructed. And the work that Bob and his team begun is a clear door to more conversations about how we can wrap our families into this conversation, obviously wrap the people who are clinically trained, our teachers into this conversation, and we can construct a vision that is going to adequately prepare all of our kids. Does that make sense? Okay. I want to go to the next slide. I'm saying this, though, because in order for us to realize that vision, our professional community has to be able to do the work. And one thing I will say very confidently is that we have amazing educators here. And I'm not saying that just because I'm the superintendent, right? I don't get any extra zeros in my check, right? But I'm saying that because I've seen it in the front lines, particularly in the context of this national pandemic. I have seen a level of selflessness. But what is even more impressive is as I talk to our teachers and we talk about where we want to be, they are specifically saying they want to be part of the solution. They are specifically saying they want to be part of the solution. And to me, it doesn't matter how you construct any improvement efforts. The baseline ingredient is commitment and work ethic, and I believe we have that here in Stratfor. So I want to draw some recognition, some things to highlight some of the successes, and by no means, this is not an exhaustive list. There's a tremendous amount of people across our system who are doing amazing things. And I know Amy Pinto is you're probably gonna hear from Amy about that image. But in the fall, in the early fall, NCAA President Mike Fiorello was recognized at the national level, right? Mike happens to be here today, she's coming up. Most recently, I believe, last December, Yvonne Temple was recognized by the regional chapter of the NAACP. And I want to draw attention, this particularly made me proud. A few weeks back, Jack Del Piano from Stratfor High School sent myself and Dr. Gaeta an email really drawing attention to the work that they have done of increasing enrollment of our young ladies in our computer science program. They were recognized as one of 760 schools across the state to receive this distinction. So our kids are doing it in the classroom. We have talented people, right? But we're humbled knowing that we still have a tremendous amount of work to do in front of us. Also want to draw attention, I know our entire community fully embraced the work with Disney Studios in the fall with our marching band. And then obviously, this was my first year in Stratford, and working across the state, you know, everybody knows about Sandy Hook. I did not know that Minnesota was an alumni until I arrived here. And when I saw how much the community really embraced the memory and the legacy of this alumni, for me specifically, it was moving. But beyond that, their work to give back to the Stratford community is unmatched. We have literally, I met alumni who flew in from all over the country, who have received scholarship in Vicky Soto's name. And most recently, I believe we received a donation of 15,000 in books, right?
Right, for the high school.
For the high schools. I mean, we have to be able to applaud that and clap. So a tremendous amount of good things that are happening in Stratford, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few moments, but we have to be able to tell these stories. We have to be able to tell these stories. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to draw attention to the process. There's a host of considerations that go into the construction of a 152-page document. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a month. It's ongoing. But as I entered the Stratford Public Schools, my first task was to study the entire organization, this academic institution. This is study it deeply and try to identify opportunities for improvement. We did that against the backdrop of the historical trends with the budget. As I shared with the board last summer, I had an entry plan, but that entry plan was intentional. Okay, that entry plan was a front-facing entry plan where I had the opportunity to speak to people, hear about the hopes and dreams, make notes about the things that were important to them, hear about the ideas of how we can improve and where we want to take Stratford Public Schools. A lot of that information comes back here. State mandates, state trends, input from parent forums. I had a series of town hall meetings. You know, in some places they call that a listen and learn tour. Had the opportunity to meet with our families at the elementary level, meet with our families at the middle school level, and meet with our families at the high school level. At those meetings, we had anywhere between 45 and maybe 50 parents or 60 parents who attended based on the developmental level. And can I tell you that the passion and pride that exists for Stratford Public Schools is real. But more than that, we have families who are requesting, voicefully, better. But again, they want to be part of the solution. Okay, so as a new district leader, that is encouraging, and coupled with the skill set of our faculty and staff, I believe we're going to be in the right, we're going to move in the right direction. I did construct Superintendent Advisories where I get a chance on a quarterly basis to meet with teachers. I also have a matching advisory of students because student voice is so important in what we do. So I meet with them on a regular basis, and obviously there are contractual considerations that inform the budget. I also take a look at what's happening regionally with our neighbors, right? And then obviously, this is the nature of the work, right? You're all familiar with Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. we have to remain in a perpetual state of how do we continue to improve, because the children of Stratford deserve it. And then obviously data. All right? So, this brings us to our executive summary, or the proposal. Next slide. So we are asking the board, or proposing to the board, a budget for $125,711,920 for next academic year. And this is an increase of approximately $5.5 million, or 4.6 from the previous year. This is not new to the people who are in this room. We know that major drivers of the budget reside in contractual obligations. But we also recognize that last year we had an unforeseen cost as relates to the spike with special education costs. And we're feeling the residual effects of that this year. So right now we are trending, a little bit later I'll call my colleagues to speak to this with a little bit more detail and specificity, but we're trending somewhere in the range of a $1.7 to a $2 million deficit at the end of this year. Next slide. So, coming in at a 4.6 request, right, and understanding that we are still in this perpetual state of continuous improvement, how do we find ways to still have effective outcomes and achievement outcomes for our students? Well, we have to look inside. Ideally, we want every resource that we can get to be able to adequately support our hardworking professional staff and meet the variance in student needs that we have that emerge every day. But in the absence of that, we have to take a better look at how we operate inside. So for the past 6 or so months, we've been analyzing programs and trying to identify whether or not we can find efficiencies. We have been looking at organizational structures to figure out where if we were required to make cuts, where could we diffuse tasks and responsibilities and still have an efficacious programmatic design. And the last piece that I think is going to be prudent for this board to have discussions on is the education reserve funding. So, again, what lies in front of us will be a challenge. But I've got zero concerns because I've seen the work ethic of people, and we have a brilliance that exists here in Stratford that we can be solution focused and create a culture and an infrastructure that will make sure that all of our children realize the portrait of a graduate. Perhaps we'll go to the next slide. This kept coming up. This was a learning piece for me, right? About how do we galvanize a community? How do we galvanize a community and move in one coherent direction? And I think Dan Hicks listed this on Twitter. You see the Second Hill Lane colors on there. It's how do we continue to move as one team, one family, one community. And I think context matters. So let's go to the next slide. This is a snapshot of our district enrollment. As I mentioned, we are one of the most diverse school districts in the state of Connecticut. Over the last year, we've seen an enrollment increase of approximately 140 kids. And over the last couple of years, and I'll ask my colleagues to speak about this a little bit later, we've seen approximately 200 new kids with IEPs, okay, whether they were move-ins or whether they were through evaluation. And that's a spike, okay, that is a spike. If we can perhaps go to the next slide. This is a breakdown of our enrollment. Okay, this is not new. For board members, we see this at the back of every board packet as we prepare for our meetings. But I wanted to draw attention, to our numbers, okay? So if you look at this as a district, this illustration shows that 16% of our kids are students with exceptionalities, right? Now this reflection right here is just our in-district population. And every one of those children may have a variance in the type of programs that they need to meet their learning targets. Additionally, we take a look at our minority student enrollment, and we are at approximately 69% of our students are students of color, okay? Essentially, that means that 7 out of every 10 of our children are students of color, okay? And somebody maybe tipped me off. The last time I heard the amount of different languages we speak in our community was 40, 48? 49? Okay? So when you think about the diversity, we can reflect on the type of needs that all of our children bring as they come into our buildings on a daily basis. Now, that being said, you probably see my annotation on this slide, and it says the numbers will grow. I do believe firmly, I wouldn't even say I believe, I'm confident, that if we accomplish the things I think we're able to accomplish as a district, at the school level, we will become an attractive option for families. And as somebody who has been looking for real estate, there's not a lot of things in the market in our town. Okay, inventory is low. All right, Stratfor is already attractive, and if we continue to move with this upward trajectory, we will become even more attractive. And that's a good thing. Get more taxpayers. Right? So, next slide, please. This is a per pupil expenditure slide. You can see that historically, or at least this year, we historically pay less per child than our DERG, the demographic reference group, as well as the state. So, I've listed some of the opportunities, some of the challenges. Perhaps we go to the next slide. I've talked very openly about a hardworking professional community, and if there was no evidence of that, I believe a few weeks back you saw how a professional community came together. We had a flash freeze, right? And I took some heat for that, but I will say, hopefully I'm not in a position to have to make such a call again, but I was so impressed with the way our staff stepped up. Okay, our teachers have been absolutely tremendous. I had a chance to visit schools on that specific day. I started my day that day. I went to Bunnell High School, and as I was walking through campus, I saw a teacher come out of the classroom to another teacher, and we had a small talk, and the conversation was, hey, listen, I have a free period next period. If you need me to help you, I can help you. That's what it takes, right? That's teamness. We had administrators deployed across our community to help support schools. It takes that kind of effort to continue to grow. So it's a hard-working staff, and I think over the last couple of years, I know Ms. Temple began this work around the minority teacher recruitment program. You'll see that we're making progress in incremental gains. Every year, we're moving in the right direction. Okay, every year we're moving in the right direction. There is an asset in being able to bring in a more diverse, representative, professional community, because it brings in new perspectives, right? It brings in new perspectives. So with the opportunities that we have, we're going to give it a good consideration. Let us move forward to the next slide. Budget history. Over the last 3 years, on average, the Board of Education has been appropriated with approximately 2.4% annually. And this year, you're seeing that 4.6. But as I prefaced a little bit earlier, okay, the special education costs that we've incurred this year has had an impact. And in the absence of that, which could be responded to through excess costs or the reserve fund, in the absence of that cost that's trending at approximately just under $2 million, our ask today, with everything held constant, would be approximately 2.8%.
Does the 125 include recouping the $1.7 to $2 million deficit that you
It's
discussed.
embedded in there. Yeah. So by federal law, we are responsible for special education needs by law. So it is in there. We'll have the opportunity to have deeper conversations on that after I'm done with this presentation. So let's go to the next slide. Looking at this presentation, this is just a visual representation. As we discussed earlier, approximately 76% or so of our operating budget is committed to compensation and benefits. And then you'll see the other breakdowns. Now, as we move forward into the week, we'll have different workshops and we can take a little bit more of a micro level analysis into those other departments or other divisions. Next slide. Again, these are, this is just a different visual illustration, but these are also embedded in your budget book. So, we will slide on to the next slide. And I want to present this because this is debatably where a lot of our conversations will be centered, which is good. These conversations are not meant to be easy, but that's why we get into this process where we can discuss this back and forth and then ultimately reach some level of consensus, a majority, about what's the best path to carve forward. I do want to say that this is only in proposal, okay? No decisions have been made. If we go back to the pie chart, okay, it was very clear that 76% of our operating budget is committed to salaries and benefits. So when you think about it, it's almost impossible to make a dent without touching personnel. But I'll tell you this, personally, from a philosophical standpoint, the last thing you want to touch in the educational system is people. It's professional. It's backed by research. The people who have the greatest impact on student learning, student outcomes, people who are front-facing kids, right? So this is up for consideration. We're talking about 1.0 STEM coordinator, deeper conversations about the enrichment teachers. We're looking at 1 FTE at each high school and the career tutors at each high school. Again, there were some very deep philosophical conversations around this proposal when it comes to FTEs and personnel, because our belief system resides in the fact that personnel should be the last people touched. However, we did feel that if we were required to make significant cuts, that we can absorb some of the responsibilities without, at a great place, compromising the scope of our academic programs. Okay? So, I should also potentially note, and I know in our previous conversation with the board, in some circumstances we've asked, other presenters, if you had a wish list in a utopian space, right, what would it be? Uniquely enough, we ask our building leaders the same thing, okay? So I do want to note that the number you're seeing here today, the proposals that you're seeing here today, are not inclusive of new initiative requests by our buildings or our coordinators. They're not inclusive of any kind of additional personnel requests. So we are really presenting a lean budget. Next slide, please. I thought this was important to note, okay? Because at my entry point, as I analyzed some of the financials, I did have a concern about the fiscal cliff. And it will be problematic for us as a district. Pam and Jeannie has, since I've been here, done an excellent job of really talking about this point. And I think people should listen. This is not unique to Stratford. It's across the state. Superintendents are talking about it. Boards of education are talking about it. Principals are talking about it. Families are talking about it. But it's important to note this because when we identify goals as a board, there are certain key pieces that have to be in place if the board is to realize those goals, right? It's organizational design, it's strategic design. And if some of those pieces are not there, it compromises the board's ability to realize those goals. This is quite substantial. We'll hear a little bit more about this. Pam and Jeannie monitors these numbers in real time. So she'll talk a little bit more broadly about this, but I do believe that we need to have deeper conversations about this sooner rather than later. But more importantly, we must move from just conversations to a response or a plan. Okay? So it's next slide, and I believe this is the final slide. So these are my thoughts for the work ahead. We have a good amount of work. There's no doubt about that. I think we're going to have a lively discussion today. I want to hear from our colleagues. You guys all bring a great deal of expertise to this conversation. But I'm also looking forward to the workshops, right, where we can have more specific and detailed conversations to inform the way the Board of Education makes this decision. But I do think we need to center a lot of our conversations around this internal tension between fiscal responsibility. We're always going to lead with fiscal responsibility, right? And it's my job as the superintendent, it's my responsibility over time to talk about a return on investment. But having that conversation about fiscal responsibility in its juxtaposition with high quality education opportunities for all of our children. I think we need to be able to anchor all of our decisions on data. Sometimes it's easy to slide into the emotional piece, but if the decisions are not aligned to board goals, right, then it compromises a lot of things for our students in terms of what the experience they have in classrooms. I think we should have deeper conversations around advocacy for the Education Reserve Fund, because it can really position us to avoid some of the challenges that we're seeing with spiking special education costs. That's critical, particularly with the fiscal cliff movement. Fiscal cliff. But I also think that the way we go about designing this as the Board of Education is through the next iteration of our strategic operating plan. It is in this space that with the work that we do from a system standpoint, that we can have accountability outcomes and metrics tied to that. Okay? So I'm going to close with this. Okay? It is my privilege every day. You know, when I drive in, I pull in the parking lot, or I visit a school, I recognize how blessed I am. Okay? And I look at Stratfor Public Schools and I say there's a good amount of work in front of us. But it's work that we are all committed to, it's work that I'm committed to, and I would say with a great deal of confidence that we can do it. Stratfor Public Schools can be a beacon in the region for so many different reasons. But what that looks like and how that plays out is going to be based on the conversations that we have in this room. It's going to be based on the conversations that we have with our stakeholders, with our families, and it's going to be based on the decisions that we make. So on behalf of the district leadership team, our principals, our students, and our families, I'd like to say thank you for listening to this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Sunday. I think Dr. Sunday is going to be joining us back at the bench. And we can now open it up to macro level type questions for either Dr. Sunday or his team with regard to the presentation.
Do we have a microphone for the team? Good luck now.
It will be heard, I'm sure. Your voice clears.
Okay, once again, floor is open for questions. Mr. Proda.
Thank you. Question on the, I guess there's 3 sheets that have budget impact that you're showing as reduction in staff, the number of which we had funded through ESSER, in the previous year, and then the district-wide certified staff of just over $500,000. You're removing those positions from your $125 million budget, is that correct?
Those are currently expensed.
I'm sorry, those are currently out.
Out. Correct.
So, putting you on the spot, since we don't want to look at personnel early on, of those positions, particularly as we look at the increase in our special ed situation, and we're cutting a special ed coordinator, and the 8 classroom instructional assistants, are any of those special ed related?
Can I
Do you
respond to
still have
that?
special?
Yeah, of course.
Actually, the positions that are expensed to ESSER, we can fund for fiscal year 23 and 24, so those positions are not going to be gone. The $500,000 that
Okay.
the superintendent proposed were recommendations to actually remove the positions going into fiscal year 23. I think we really need to highlight that the ESSER grant monies go away in 2 more years, and it's not necessarily, never was necessarily the district's plan to remove those positions. We were hoping we could find efficiencies, repurposing, and as Dr. Sunday, the poor man walked in here in July, and I think I brought this to his attention immediately because it is a concern. So we have been starting to talk about what we can do because we can't wait until we're doing the fiscal year 24 budget for this. So just to clarify, that's the only reason those positions are listed in here.
So the 2.245 total estimated expenses to ESSER grants, those positions are currently in the budget.
Correct.
However, the $507,000 worth of positions have been removed from the budget.
And again, in the ESSER budget, not the general operating, the 2.2 million.
Right, but are they counted into the 125?
No.
No, okay.
Mrs. Lance?
On the same topic, I don't understand how department heads, math phys ed, health coordinator, and the 2 athletic directors became ESSER grant based when they were always in the regular budget. So can somebody explain to me why they were taken out of the previous budgets and now?
I'd be happy to.
Pam, please.
Last year, when we got our appropriation from the town, we had asked for 3.88%. The board's budget was approved at that number. We were told we had 2.25% and we should use our ESSER funds. We did have discussions that that was not a best practice, and we were actually going to end up with this fiscal cliff, and at some point we probably have to ask the town for an 8% increase. So we've been very candid with that, but it was definitely not the time to be reducing staff when our students have never needed the staff more than they do right now. So these were positions that we thought maybe there was some viability to maybe tweak a little over the next couple of years, and we thought we had 3 fiscal years to do that. We're going into the 2nd, so we really need to come up with a plan because obviously it's going to be an additional almost 2% to our budget when we finally.
So these positions probably, well, not these particular positions, but positions would not have been funded last year that you had hoped to fund, and that's why you decided to take these positions under the ESSER funds?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Davis?
Yes, and through the chair, and I want to be very careful how we answer this question. I really don't want names or anything, but I need to know this. We have an aggressive minority recruitment program going on. The way the bumping system goes, whatever union, it's usually the newest people that lose their jobs. Did we take a look at how that's going to affect?
I mean, with these positions that
With these
proposing?
specific 7 positions, how that affects?
Yeah, we did. One of them is an administrative position, and that would not have a direct impact on a minority administrative candidate. The enrichment positions we have to take a deeper look at, and I'll probably defer to Dr. Gata on that. And then the 2 other proposed building FTEs, I don't have those hard data.
And we don't need that tonight, that's what I'm saying, we can talk about that during the workshops and stuff, but it's something I'd like to look at. You know, we're working hard to, minority recruitment, and we're letting go of people. It's not really
Absolutely.
smart business.
Mr. Cardo?
What did you anticipate for retirements for the end of this fiscal year?
It's still early. I think we have a notification deadline, I believe, of April 1st, but I would like to defer to Ms. Courtney Brown to speak to that.
We have to have the teacher's intent to retire by April 1st. So we really don't have a concrete number yet. I think we have 3 intents so far.
I'm sorry?
We only have 3 at this point.
And when you budgeted, did you budget for a number?
We plan to get into that during the workshop on
Okay.
Wednesday, but we did.
Okay.
And again, those are intents.
Right.
So we're not really being held, but to your point, there is $100,000 reduced in our salaries right now.
Okay.
Perhaps, Ms. Mangini, you might be able to speak. Historically, what kind of savings do we realize from retirements? It's not.
I will get that information on Wednesday because while it should be a simple answer, it really isn't. Because I think what has happened in the past year is that it often was used to fund other positions. So I want to give you accurate information.
Of course.
And I'll make a note so I don't forget.
Just a quick question, I'm not sure who's best to answer it, but when the ESSER grants and the ARP ESSER grants came about and they were, placed in our hands, how was it decided that certain funds would be used for salaried positions as opposed to other direct student needs?
Well, so the appropriations for that, I wasn't part of that conversation because those conversations happened before my entry point. But if you have a more specific question, maybe clarify, because I'm not understanding, unless you want to reserve it for the workshops.
We can reserve for the workshops.
And if I may, we are preparing some updated reports for all of you on those ESSER grants, how they're being spent, remind you of what the spending plan was, particularly for those of you that are new.
But I will speak to, the point that you bring up about student needs and its impacts, of the pandemic. We have been doing some system-wide work around the social-emotional aspects of things. We have been doing some work about engagement and outreach. Every building has a point person who is making calls for students who are disengaged. Our school psychologists and our school social workers have been working overtime to make sure that they support kids with their needs. The challenges we're seeing with mental health and social-emotional behaviors of kids it's not unique to just Stratfor. There's a lot of places that are responding to that. But the one thing that we do is we try to track, overall how kids start the year, where they're at the beginning of the year, and where they're at the end of the year. Part of that conversation is I talk to our principals who just engage in the video reflection. They're recognizing progress. And I think as a community, we're seeing, the rough start to the year improve, right, as we trend to the midpoint. I did have conversations recently with some district leaders who spoke about, even though there's no high-profile stuff, there's still some concerning behaviors. So that's the next level of the work that we are looking to engage in with our donor leaders and our kids. But we have to be able to engage kids in conversations and hear from them, which really serving as the catalyst for some of these challenges.
Are there any other questions?
Chair, and I'm not sure if it affects this year's budget, but I know the preschool requirement from the state of Connecticut is looming. I'm not sure if it's 23 or 24, but have we looked at what we're going to do for that, whether it's buildings or staff?
Yeah.
I guess, is it in this budget at all, or?
It's not reflected in this budget, but it is definitely a conversation, and I'm actually going to call Heather Borges. She has been the person ringing the bell for me on that topic, so she's my in-house expert. Ms. Borges?
So to answer your question, yes, we are aware of again, all the rules and regulations around it are still being figured out. The state will be figuring out all of those next year, but we are looking at our current potential population of preschool kids within our whole town, how we can fit within our buildings, what kind of structural changes we need. And those things are all going to kind of be figured out, but we do have a lot of members that are part of the state group that's looking at this universal preschool. So we're going to keep that information flowing, and we are working directly on it.
And because we have a lot of new board members, if you can explain what the new regulations are a little bit, just from a high level.
Sure. You know, you guys, we're going to know more about this next year, but really universal preschool is coming down the pipe, which doesn't mean that preschool is mandatory for every family, but we need to make it an option for every family. So when we look at our population of 3 and 4-year-olds in Stratfor, you could be looking at anywhere around 800 students that would like to get educated in a full-day preschool program, okay? The state's going to decide whether or not our current preschools stay in practice and we just monitor them, whether we have to have it within our buildings. There's going to be a whole bunch of decisions coming down the pipe for us to do, but we are going to ultimately have to offer an education for all of our preschool kids as well. And that includes the integrated preschool, which we oversee now, plus remember, we still have some readiness. So we're started, but it's going to be a big process, and it'll all come into play next year with all of the different decisions that get made at the state level.
No, I would extend on that, you know, and that's what I was referencing when I said we track state trends, right? So we have some kind of forward thinking. It's one of the biggest things that, you know, I also speak widely to is making sure we're forward thinking, but also adequately prepared. At the very least, we should be positioned to get information into the hands of our board so we can make informed decisions.
Thank you.
Of course.
Dr. Sunday, I'd like to ask a question, but I think Dr. Gator might be best to answer. The 2 high school positions slated, does the removal of those 2 positions affect our credit requirements at all? The high school graduation credit requirements?
At this point, we're scheduling students for next year, actually looking at enrollment for next year. Currently, it looks as though our staff, we will be able to meet the requirements, but we're going to continue to monitor that. So, you know, until the final schedule is in place, we should know that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll extend on that. We do believe that it could be tight based on how course requests, you know, pan out. But we're trying to figure out the most, you know, efficiency is what you heard me speak about, and I referenced that in terms of systems. And the master schedule system is something that really determines the culture of the school, right? So we're examining that. I know Dr. Gaeta has been working with our supervisor for school counseling on that part. The kids, and I know Dr. Graff might be able to speak to this as well, the kids just completed the course request, and I think the tallies are being tabulated at this point.
They're in the process now, so the initial tab reports will be out within the week, and then obviously there are conflicts and students are absent and individual meetings that will take place, and we'll have a more definitive number by hopefully mid-February. Both high schools were down a counselor for an extended period of time, so it's taken us slightly longer than we initially anticipated.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Bedell?
Just to piggyback off of that, there was also a listing of a reduction in the enrichment teachers, and you mentioned it in your presentation as well. Does that mean we'll be offering 0 enrichment programs, or will there be a development of another type of enrichment program through the staff that we have?
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're looking at. So we had a challenge filling at least one of those positions this year, all year, and half the year is already surpassed. We're having broader conversations about how do we continue to offer our kids high-level work, kids who are identified. But perhaps I'll invite Dr. Gates to maybe speak on this topic as well.
Well, as Dr. Sunday started his presentation, we look at the portrait of a graduate. I really do feel that that's going to open up the conversation for all of our students. In addition to the high school rubrics for each one of those attributes of a portrait of a graduate, we will have elementary rubrics as well and middle school rubrics. So there's going to be a vertical alignment in that area. And I think that's going to open up options and considerations for all of our students. One of the things that we've done in the past is to focus mostly on 4th grade. Students are identified at the end of 3rd. In the 4th grade, the program really kicked off. We used to have 2 enrichment teachers who would divide themselves among the 2 schools and work with students primarily in 4th grade. What came out of that as a focus of STEM and some of the other interests was the invention convention for 4th graders. And not only was it available for students who were identified, but for all students.
everybody could participate. So as part of that program, teachers were offered an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the Invention Convention, and they would support students in their classroom during the course of that window when that took place. And by the way, we need judges. Sam Rosenberg is about for judges, so if anybody's interested in being more involved in the program, you can do that. In addition to that, we do try over the summer, there's a program called Confortute at UConn that the enrichment teachers would go to, and so we've tried to open that up to others to attend that so that they can become more aware of opportunities to engage all of our students in for enrichment. So in the past, most of the emphasis was on 4th grade, but 5th and 6th graders were also involved as well. As Dr. Sunday said, we have had difficulty filling the 2 positions this year. And so we currently have an experienced person who's in that position. Our pre-K-6 STEM coordinator has also been filling in so that all students who are identified have had an opportunity to engage with somebody. The program in the past has been push in and pull out, so we would expect that some of that would continue with those who have areas of expertise, whether it be mathematics or reading, along those lines. So, those conversations I think are going to continue.
I would probably, if you remember, I did preface the process. It's not our philosophy. The last thing we want to touch was FTEs or people. But it was a complete challenge to be able to present a budget, right? Knowing that a responsible budget, knowing that there was a high probability that it would require an impact on FTE. So we tried to reduce, quote unquote, the radius blast in a way that we feel is still hopefully run effective programs, but at the same time present to them more a proposal for deeper conversations. So again, it remains our philosophy that if we can avoid touching personnel, that would be the way to go.
Thank you.
Mrs. Lance and then Mr. Henry.
Thank you. Mrs. Wiltsey, Pam, if we decide this year that we want to reallocate some of the ESSER funds, are you allowed to do that? Because once you have committed to those funds, are they committed for 3 years, or can they be changed midstream?
We're allowed to do revisions during specific times. The ESSER 1 grant has to be spent in full by this June 30th, so that money is basically gone. ESSER 2, we're working through. We might have a little flexibility. And then we have our ESSER, and as an administrative team, we're always looking at how we're spending those funds and how we can tweak them. So there is some possibility.
Thank you, Mr. Henry.
Yeah, have we ever looked at any incentive type programs to encourage retirements? Can be a twofold gain. There could be significant savings, but it could also open up avenues for a much younger minority population to come here and work. So do we have, I know a long time ago we did that in the town of Stratford, but is that something that's ever been looked at, or is it a possibility? Or?
It is in practice, and I did bring that up in conversation. I would like to defer to Ms. McKinney to speak about that.
Mr. Henry, we did look at it. We've actually done some rough scenarios. We weren't really convinced that it would be any significant savings at this point to the district. So while we've had to reschedule a couple of times our seminar for our staff on retirement. Not that everyone who attends is going to necessarily retire, they're just looking for information, but sometimes that helps them make the decision. So it's kind of a situation where we have to really crunch some numbers, and again, it just didn't look like we had enough people that were going to really make it worthwhile right now.
But when I say incentives, I'm talking some type of a financial incentive.
I know exactly, I've been through them many times.
You might want to
be honest, personally, I don't think they're always cost effective. I mean, you really have to be in a good place, and you have to look at where those teachers are, because our teachers know better than anyone if it's a science position, if it's math, if it's special ed. There isn't going to be much of a savings when those people retire, because we simply can't get those positions filled. And if we do, it's usually at a very high salary. So we take a lot into consideration, and we did most definitely start to crunch those numbers, and we'll continue to look at it.
Mrs. Lance?
If I can address that, and I know Michael, if he's allowed to speak, can help me with this. Was it 10 or 12 years ago, Stratfor did offer, when I was union president?
Yes, I was going to say yield to you. because
Stratfor
that's
did
what-
offer an incentive, and what it was that anybody who was under 65, they paid part of their insurance, and they gave them money for it was a 5-year plan. And we had quite a few teachers take advantage of it. I can't remember exactly how many, but it was a good plan at that time, and we had brought it up in the past years, and it just was not cost effective at that time. But I think it would be worth looking into, because there are some older teachers now.
More experience, not older.
No,
I did not say older, Ms. Lance did.
I did, because it all comes down to insurance. That's what it comes down to when the teacher wants to retire, because until they're 65, they can't go on to Medicare. So Stratford is one of the very few districts that pays a partial of the teacher's retirement insurance. And that was huge, and that was why those teachers took the early retirement, was because they were having more money paid in their insurance, correct, Michael?
It's not early retirement. It was an early departure program.
But you're only eligible for retirement by whatever the state retirement system allows.
Right. So we
Yes,
allowed,
that's what it was called, but those people who left were all of longevity to be able to
And
retire.
if I remember,
but they did not have to retire.
No, they did not,
and the savings was not as great as we anticipated.
especially over 5 years.
Mr. David, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. Not to get into the nit and grit of the budget, but I did see one thing that kind of jumped out at me, and that was health insurance. That is going up, it's very hard to say, 1.2 million. Thank you for the larger font, Mr. Magini. 8.41%. Is that a done number?
That is absolutely incredible. I have been with 5 districts, and I'm usually looking at 15 to 20% increases. When the district switched to Anthem, and Courtney, correct me if I'm wrong, was that fiscal year 19 or 20? It must have been 20, I think, right? When you changed over to Anthem, it was a wonderful deal. The first 2 years, we were locked in, so it's really a good thing. It's helped our budget significantly.
But that's a locked number. That number's not going down, it's not going up. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
I'm sorry, you saw how excited I got.
No. I don't know if I was excited on 8.41, but it's good to go.
Just following up on a similar question, I know in the past 5, 6 years or so, the insurance has been reviewed a couple of times. Have we looked into reviewing that further? I realize that that percentage is a very good.
No, we have, and actually, we're working through Brown & Brown and as our insurance representatives, and they are on top of it all the time. So, yes, we are. And even our general liability insurance, all the insurances, we went out to bid last year and saved quite a bit of money. And again, may I just remind everyone, if you do have questions for the upcoming workshop and you want to email them to us, perhaps Teresa or even myself, we'll be prepared to address them at that meeting and perhaps help you a little bit as we move along in the process, because I have a fairly good memory. The people sitting there are way better than I am, but sometimes it just isn't quick recall, so we'd love to be able to have the info for you as you requested.
Thank you, Mrs. Mangini.
A point of order on that, you want to make sure the chair is CC'd on that, though, for sending questions to you.
I will share responses with everyone.
Okay.
All right, well, I guess there's no other questions. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Mrs. Bedell, seconded by Mrs. Kupi, and Finance Budget Workshop meeting is adjourned at 7:34. Thank you, everyone.